government, Metro-Dade Television, or the Community Relations Board.
I never worked over there. This is my first work in the United States.
But you will have prejudice no matter where you go, you know.
Sometimes I feel that I fit in, and some other times I feel like I don't belong.
We need some help over here, and it doesn't seem to want to come this way unless you do something drastic to bring the attention here.
Hello, I am Ari Sosa, your host for this special edition of Voices, in which we'll look at Black History Month, a special time for the black community, for historians, and for all of us.
Each February, Black history is given recognition across the land through exhibits, ceremonies, speeches, and seminars. Achievements by famous blacks are lauded, along with noteworthy contributions by the lesser known. Black history is permanently on display at the Black History Archives. Some community leaders, however, decry the observance and state that the history of blacks in America is all around us, should not be one particular focus at one particular time, and should not be separated from the rest of history.
Pull Charles Drew out and to discuss him in black history, that's not black history, that's medical history. What you do in black history is that you start from whence we came. And there's some debate about that, whether or not it's 1426 or 1619, but let's assume we accept the popular date, which is 1619. And you've got to talk about what has happened historically to us as a people from 1619 to 1990. For us, in that kind of historical perspective, to talk about who invented the traffic light, even though that was, quote, a black person, that's not black history. That's part of the history as it relates to the development and planning of cities.
Dorothy Fields, founder of the Black Archives Foundation of Southern Florida, states the opposite view.
It's very interesting recently as controversy has increased about the month that we now have. We know that a month certainly is not enough, that the inventors and the many contributions that have been made to America's development must be carried out throughout the year, but February begins the year, and that is what should be known. We encourage teachers and students and the community at large to join with us in celebrating Black History Month in February, using that time to plan programs and activities that can be implemented throughout the year.
Black History Month has been on the calendar since 1976. Should it stay on the calendar, or should it be changed in any way? We'll hear various points of view on the subject on Voices.
We have two guests who bring a wealth of insight into black history. Ms. Arva Moore Parks is one of our most famous local historians, and Dr. John O. Brown, who is a former member and vice chairperson of the Community Relations Board and a strong advocate in making black history meaningful for all of us. I want to welcome both of you to our program.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Brown, you were a member of the Community Relations Board during a time that the black history was not still officially recognized, but as a matter of fact was being made through the process of civil rights movement. I would like to ask you what are some of the highlights of that period that you can recall?
Dr. Sosa, I would like to say this about black history, that we were a part of a portion of black history. Black history has been around for a long, long time. And certainly the civil rights movement has been one of the most recent developments in the black history of this country. I was involved in the sit-in movement here in the city of Miami. In fact, it was the sit-ins and the attack against public discrimination in public accommodations that brought about the formation of the Community Relations Board. I was a part of the organization called CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And we believed in direct confrontation, nonviolent confrontation, in order to eliminate discrimination in public accommodations. And we resorted to the sit-ins and the stand-ins at the movies and things of this nature in order to secure the rights of citizenship here in this area. And I would like to say that our sit-ins here preceded the sit-ins in Greensboro, but the sit-ins in Greensboro is given the credit because that was the beginning of the student sit-in movement. Our sit-ins here involved adults, grown-ups, and professional people of all races. And we started here the year before they started in Greensboro. Now, we were not the first ones in the country because a year prior to our sit-ins, there were sit-ins in Oklahoma City led by a lady by the name of Clara Luper. And, of course, the original sit-ins, the beginning of course, started in 1942 during World War II at the University of Chicago, when Jim Former led a group of individuals there for sit-ins at the restaurants in order to get black students at the University of Chicago admitted and served in restaurants in the Chicago area. That sounds sort of strange today that you would talk about in Chicago, the land of the free at that time, where there were no racial discriminatory laws. And the sit-ins began there in 1942, led by Jim Former. And that was the beginning of the organization, Congress of Racial Equality. As a result of our sit-ins here, it was thought that there should be a mediating body for some of the problems that we had here. And I think as a result of communication with an individual who has never been given any credit in this community, a man by the name of John Turner, who was one of the corporate executives of City Service Oil Company, I believe, City Service or Phillips 66, one of the two. And he was the one who developed the idea of the CRB along with Archbishop Coleman Carroll of the Catholic Diocese and Henry King Stanford, who was the president of the University of Miami. And this came about as a mediating group. It was a small group, not the group that we have today. But the one thing that I have really questioned about the CRB for years has been the fact that it never had the powers of subpoena. And I thought that during my tenure with the CRB, I was always pressing, why is it we can't get powers of subpoena? And the county commission always said, you'll destroy the effect of the CRB. We cannot force people to talk and communicate on these matters.
Yeah, that's something that they have insisted and said once again. The thing that our power has to be really in persuasion and not in making anybody come and declare. But that's most interesting, what you have said, that the citizens of Miami were one of those pioneers in that sit-in that actually brought some changes. Ms. Parks, as a historian, how can you tell us how does the struggle for civil rights in South Florida differs from those in some other parts of our country?
Well, I think in basic ways it doesn't differ from any other areas, certainly in the South, when you had de facto segregation by law, which began with the founding of Miami when Henry Flagler divided the city into colored town and everybody else's town. But I think that the history of blacks in South Florida, I don't like to think it started with, I agree with what Dr. Brown said, it hardly begins with the Civil Rights Movement. It begins with the beginning of the history of Miami. There are blacks that are involved in the incorporation. There are blacks that arrived to clear for the Royal Palm Hotel, and there's a history by John Sewell that was an eyewitness to this that describes the importance of blacks in the early history of Miami and names them with first and last names. And as a historian, that's a very remarkable piece of South Florida history that we do have that starts in 1896.
Correct. Now we have February as a Black History Month. Doctor, what is the significance, the importance of naming just one month as History Month out of the 12 months of the year?
The significance of having 1 month is really the beginning of black history for the entire year. It stresses it for that portion of time, which will extend through the next 11 months. I think that the main reason for this is that we have been neglected for centuries in this country, the black input into the development of America. And the history books were not written by blacks, nor did blacks participate in the writing of the history. So consequently, we were left out, and there were many, many portions of contributions that were made by blacks, and they have not been emphasized at all. In fact, they were just omitted. It just happened. And I think that we need this month in order to stress these things and also set a pattern for the next 11 months of the year.
I think that we, of course, agree with that. I know the Community Relations Board, at the beginning of this decade, we presented a recommendation to the Public School Board that they develop an articulate kindergarten to 12th grade curriculum on intergroup relations, you know, and that black history and Hispanic history, and actually that we put the values of the various ethnic groups that have contributed to the growth of Miami, you know, as part of our curriculum, so it can be studied by all students all year round, and just not during 1 month. Even though I do agree, you know, that let's put the emphasis in one particular month, but at the same time, don't you think let's have it also during the whole year? What is your opinion?
Well, I think it's kind of a catch-up. I would have to agree with Dr. Brown that for so long in so many history books, particularly national history books too, there were the contributions of blacks in America were not included. So that I think you need an extra amount of it as a catch-up. But I think it's even more important to have it integrated through everything that's done. That's the problem. You don't want the separate history as part of the big story, since the people are a part of the story. Everyone that's part of the story should be given their due. I don't know what other word to say. But
I would just like to add another thing here, that when you don't emphasize the input that has been made by black citizens of this country, there's a tendency to forget that they even contributed at all.
Right.
And it's just like television back in the late 50s and the early 60s. All the television programs, you would think that this was an entirely white country. There were no black faces on TV, and when you did get a chance to put a black face on there, then companies would not sponsor the programs and things of this nature. But there were many good black entertainers and everything participating in the daily life of this country, and yet, as far as television was concerned and the newspapers were concerned, they didn't really exist.
That's true.
I think so much of it is awareness. I think that's what you're saying, that once you're aware, you're aware. You don't stop at being aware. And I think that perhaps this month reminds you of the awareness. I know my friendship and historical research with Dorothy Fields through the years has made me aware of a lot of things. We grew up in the same town at about the same time, and we grew up in two different Miamis, and the conversations that we have had as two historians talking about our lives, I have found has just meant so much to me to understand the differences that we had growing up at the same place. And I think we don't want to get caught up with just famous people, but the contributions of everyone who was a part, the people that literally built the city, and the people who raised the children that were the leaders in both communities. I think that it's the importance of the people's contribution and not just the doctors and the lawyers. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the famous.
And I think that when we talk about history, we always have to look at it from the economic point of view, from also the political point of view, the religious point of view, and all of these things must be inserted and see the contributions that have come as a result of that. Many of the contributions that are made could not have been made unless some of these other situations existed.
Wonderful. Let's, at this time, take a break at this point, and let's hear what the men and women on the street have to say about the meaning of black history.
What is the meaning for you of Black History Month?
Well, it's very important. It reaffirms your cultural identity, and I think that's very essential, especially for today's youth.
It's incredibly important to our whole community, not just the blacks in the community, to recognize that we have to all celebrate this, that this is all something we all need to learn about, to bring together people.
It's time to celebrate what the blacks have done for us in appreciation for them.
Black history in itself, I think we should start way over in Africa, because that's where basically everybody has started. When people say black history and they start with 200 years, I think they're misinterpreting black history altogether.
It means a lot to me, not only because I'm black.
it means a lot to me because I'm free, and all of us should be feeling the same way, regardless of our color, creed, our nationality, or religion. And I'm very glad to be black and free.
I think it should be a time for them to remember their background, where they really came from, their roots. I think it's good. It's nice. Something that should be done, and everybody should be into it.
Black History Month, I believe that the blacks have contributed a lot to America. You know, we have a lot of famous black people here, singers, actors, and etc. And I believe that, you know, that the American, the whites, you know, should recognize what they've done, contributed. And I think, you know, that our children need to learn about their history, as well as our own history.
And welcome back to our special program on Black History, where we have with us two excellent historians, Ms. Arva Moore Parks and Dr. John O. Brown. I would like to ask a question to both of you. What events in Miami's Black history you would like to recall or to bring to the attention of our audience?
Well, I'll take the first stab at that. I think that there are a lot of things that have been ignored, and that's one of the reasons why we need this special Black History Month, February. And one incident that occurred, and it's really sort of galls me at times because it's never brought out the fact that I, as a black citizen of this community, would like for my children to know and be aware of some of the things that happened here. And a good story is that of why we have black bus drivers today. Most of the kids, I would say 95% of them, are not even aware of the fact that at one time we did not have black bus drivers. And the public transportation system was a private company here in Dade County. And it was run by an individual by the name of Pauly, who at one time had been the ambassador to Cuba. Now, they got into problems with the labor union, the bus drivers, who happened to be all white, and most of them from the state of Georgia. And they went on strike. And once they went on strike, then we were sort of paralyzed in this community. And prior to the labor strike and the union troubles with Pauly, we had asked him why we didn't have black bus drivers. He said, first, number one, they were unable to drive buses. We said, well, they have been driving big trucks and heavy transport across the South for a number of years. Then he said, well, they wouldn't be able to drive and count change. So we, of course, we countered that argument also. But after they had the strike, or during the strike, the county decided to take over the bus system. And when they took over the bus system, then they had to get blacks. They were called scabs, of course. But then once they came in, then the buses started running again. And once they started running again, when the other drivers wanted to come back, they wanted seniority. And the county says, no, you will not get seniority. You'll have to start at the bottom and work your way up. And these black bus drivers will maintain the seniority and be the ones. So this was the beginning of bus drivers. And I will never forget the pride that I felt and all the people on 3rd Avenue when the first bus came wheeling down there with a black man driving that bus. And it was just a feeling of pride. And I think that our youngsters need to be taught these things and be made aware of these things, even today.
Ms. Parks?
Well, I think it's equally important for everyone in the community that is not black to be aware of the conditions that exist, as Dr. Brown has described. Time moves rapidly, and some things have changed for the better. There are many that need to continue to change, but we need to be reminded of this because it's like the good news and the bad news in many ways of the things we have changed and the things that we continue to need to change. I think one event that made some things happen in Miami's perception of all of this was World War II. I know Dr. Brown was in it and was honored in it because I think it was very difficult to have quite the discrimination that had been previous to the war when they knew the contributions of black servicemen. And Eleanor Roosevelt actually came to Miami, and I think it tweaked the conscience. And some things began to happen back there, like the first beach, which of course was on Virginia Key, and there was no bridge to get there, which is an incredible thought when you think about it today. But at least it's a step. There were some steps that were taken that early, and it wasn't until the 60s and the leadership of the 60s that took some of the other steps. And I just have to say aside that I've admired Dr. Brown for many years, first seeing him when viewing the films of the sit-ins in downtown Miami before I ever met him years later, and listening to his eloquence. And but more than that, the films of the people coming in and sitting there, I'll never forget, and the wait-ins and the golf-ins or all the other things of that era. And I think it's important for people to see that, because everyone can relate to the bravery that it took with the police cars in the background driving up when people were trying to swim at Crandon Park. I think that's important for all of us to see and know.
Very. How about the search for fairness in public accommodations? Did the Community Relations Board or some other organization played an important role?
Not a very significant role, because I think that once the CRB was formed, then we got the Civil Rights Law, which declared discrimination illegal throughout. But we did have violations, and whenever we found the violations, they were brought to the Community Relations Board, and it was mediated. I was glad to hear Ms. Parks mention World War II and the military and Eleanor Roosevelt coming to Miami. And when you talk about World War II, that's one of my favorite subjects. And I was just, it brings to mind the presentation of events that occur in history, and it all depends on who presents it and when it is presented. I was shocked 2 days ago when I picked up Newsweek and turned to an article there by George Will, an editorial on the back cover there, speaking about the number of blacks in the military today and how it related to World War II. And in his statement there, he said, and the famous 92nd Infantry Division with 3,000 casualties made its great contribution during World War II. I was shocked, because for all the presentations that I had seen of the 92nd Infantry Division, which was an all-black division in World War II, had been more or less the infamous 92nd Division. We were mistreated, we were discriminated against, and the comments in the white press had always been that black men had been cowards in battle and things. They did not make the contributions that the white soldiers had made. And here it was that this man is admitting today that this group made a wonderful contribution. And then he compared figures today and of today's Army, the military, and those back in World War II, where we had 75% of the blacks in the military at that time in World War II were in the Army, and only 2.8% were in combat units. All the rest were in port battalions, quartermasters, engineers, or those who contributed to services for the combat soldier. In today's Army, we have about 30% of the individuals in the Army being represented by blacks. And these are the combat troops. And it goes back to a fear of giving the black man a weapon. I think it was said by a Confederate general that slaves did not make good soldiers. And if slaves became good soldiers, then someone should question the theory of slavery. And then Frederick Douglass turned around and said, well, there's no question in my mind that once you give a black man a musket with bullets in his pockets, no power on this earth can argue that he didn't earn his citizenship. And I think that this contributed greatly in World War II. They did not want the blacks to contribute to the success of the war effort, so that they would be obligated to give them first-class citizenship after the war was over.
Interesting. Let's move from our local history into national history. What would you say were some of the most significant aspects of moments in black history in the United States?
Well, I had a wonderful experience when I was in graduate school doing a large research paper on Martin Luther King, and it kind of changed me how I felt about everything. This was in about 1964. So by doing the research, I learned that the contributions that he was making to the country at the time, it was really going on. And I think the way that era was handled in this country made an enormous difference on the conscience of America. And I think that looking back at it now and also in researching it since then, nationally, locally, in every way, I think that's where everything began to change. I don't know, is here Dr.
I would like
on that too.
I would like to say that this is probably the greatest contribution so far as black history is concerned in this country, because it has changed the relationship of America to all the other countries of the world. And I think the ideals of Martin Luther King have been exemplified in the actions that we take toward peace and our relationship with the other countries. Now, up until this time, we certainly have had contributions, and there were great movements in this country, even by blacks, in the formation of organizations and things of this nature. But I think that Martin Luther King's contribution was probably the greatest.
I think that I'm going to say that there are going to be three of us then agreeing with that, because I have become, you can say, a great fan of Martin Luther King, exactly as you. When I first read one of the first books, of Martin Luther King, and then started write what he had written and about him, there's no doubt that there is a great need for all Americans, just not for black Americans, but for all Americans to read more about Martin Luther King, because he is indeed one of the great minds of thoughts of our country. And if we really look into what he has said to each one of us, I think we'll be a lot better because of it.
I'd say, excuse me, I was going to say, I would say one of the great better thoughts in world history. My term paper topic was Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King, and then pulling all of this together in the whole philosophy, and as he said it. And I think the thing is, perhaps this is my naivete as an educator, I think when people learn, they change. When people learn the facts and learn the stories, and that's how I feel why the importance of history. I think Martin Luther King is still controversial, and I think that anyone who sees it that way has not read the philosophy of the man. As recently in the Western states now, not to have a day, anyone that reads his works, as you were saying, and realize what he really did, how many people changed the course of history, is totally, and in a positive way, as this man has done. And he was in Miami, too, I know you've seen the things of that. Yes, and I think that is exciting that he was a part of what was going on here, as well as the local leaders.
And I would just like to say the personal influence that Martin Luther King had on some of the movement here in Miami. He was not a part of any of the sit-ins, any of the direct action or the nonviolent tactics that were here. But I met Martin Luther King, and I guess when I met him, I still had the military in me, and I felt that certainly there was going to be a revolution, there was going to be a change in the rights, the civil rights of blacks. But I felt that there would be violence. And about the only way you could get respect for the black man was through violence. But after talking with him and his contributions and everything, I was immediately converted. And certainly there were many instances where I could have resorted to violence, but I always thought about the nonviolent tactics of Martin Luther King.
I think that this, even though we're out of time, but I think that we are going to close this program with an excellent topic there. We were talking about Martin Luther King. Very unfortunate with our time, but still there is so much to discuss about black history, and we really hope that our viewers will take part in the many black history activities which are listed in the local newspapers, such as the Miami Times and the Miami Herald. I would like to thank very much the two of you for having been with us in what has been an excellent program, and I have learned a lot from both of you. And to our viewers, thank you very much for joining us in this program.
This program has been a public information service of Metro-Dade County.